Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, we're going to be talking about the dumbest things that I've ever done in the studio. Yes, we're going to be talking about my stupidest mistakes in these 20 or so years of being in audio, basically professionally. I've been messing around with 4-track since I was 12, and I started making money in the field of audio probably when I was 18, really working in studios basically since I was 22 or 23. And I've made a lot of dumb errors. And yet here I am, talking to you from my studio, still making a living in audio. So if I can be as dumb as I am, there's hope for you too, who are probably less dumb than I am. All right, full disclosure, I'm probably not dumb, but I've still done stupid things. And I'm sure you have too. And if you're feeling down about mistakes that you've made or bad luck that's been handed to you in the world of getting a career going in audio or music, hopefully these stories will make you feel a little bit better about it. So I want to give you the ammunition to laugh at me and lose all respect for me. Or if you never had respect for me to begin with, that's great, because then you have absolutely nothing to lose. But if you want to make fun of me, the only thing you got to do is get through the sponsor section of this podcast. Then you have all the ammunition you need. All right, here we go. Sponsors. The most important sponsor on this episode, you. How do you sponsor our podcast? By sponsoring yourself. Check out one of our full-length courses like Mixing Breakthroughs or Mastering Demystified. Mixing Breakthroughs is going to teach you everything you need to know about mixing faster, better, creatively, more effectively than ever before. It's a system for mixing culled from the best practices that I've spent the last more than a decade teasing out of the approaches of some of the best mixers working on the planet. It's a system that works. We've had thousands of students take this course, and the before and afters I hear and the testimonials we get are outstanding, but you just got to try it for yourself. You got 30 days money back guarantee, so you got nothing to lose. Check it out at mixingbreakthroughs.com. If you want your finishing rate to go way up, your time to finish mixes go way down, while your creativity, confidence, and results go way up. Or if you want to learn everything that I know about mastering, which is what I do day in and day out these days as my audio work, you can check that out at masteringdemystified.com. Also a 30-day money back guarantee there. Last quick shout out to our brand sponsors for this month before we get right into making fun of me, and they include Sound Toys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. All right, let's get right into how terrible I am at audio and all the mistakes I've made. I'll tell you that I started messing around with audio when I was about 12 years old on a 4-track. And initially, when I graduated high school, I didn't go to college because I just wanted to rock. And then I realized that everyone else who just wanted to rock was in college. So I went, and I ended up getting a degree in studio production. But while I was there, I was already working in small studios. I was already connecting with bands, bringing them to larger studios or producing things in a guerrilla kind of way at rehearsal spaces, at lake houses, wherever I could. And I was working in audio for a long time, but I never really got the experience of being the assistant at the big, fancy, super expensive studio serving all these major label projects and things. So I wanted to get that experience because at that point I felt like that was something that's necessary. I don't know that it is necessary, but at that point in the early 2000s, it seemed like the thing that I should add to my resume and life experiences. So I did. And this required me sending out about 100 resumes to literally every single large studio that existed in New York City at that point. And a few of them did write back to say, hey, it sounds great. Do you want to work for us for free? And I kind of said, I'm not in a position to do that. But one of them was out of their mind enough to pay me to be an assistant at their studio. It was a beautiful room. Back then, in those dollars, it cost $2,000 a day to book, a gorgeous big Neve console, really excellent design, lovely space. And I worked with some fairly large artists there assisting. And I also made a couple of mistakes, namely in my very first week there. It was my job to set up all of the microphones and run all the lines for a big session that was coming on later that day. And I was setting up all the mics around the drums. And one of the things that I was supposed to set up was a Coles 4038 ribbon microphone. Absolutely delicious, lovely sounding microphone. And everything I was taught up to that point had led me to understand that ribbon microphones are pretty fragile, pretty sensitive. By just even blowing on them too hard, you could potentially blow the ribbon in the microphone, and then it would be useless. So I knew that you should be careful around ribbon microphones. So I went and I put this very nice fancy mic on a big fancy heavy Atlas stand way up high over a drum kit. And walking away from my handiwork, I managed to get my foot tangled up in the mic cable, trip over it, and send the entire probably 100+ pound Atlas stand teetering over as if a lumberjack had taken out the bottom of this thing and it was just falling down like a tree in slow motion with the microphone on top of it. And it was one of those things where time slows down, but you don't speed up. So it was just like running after this 100+ pound stand with this flimsy fancy microphone on top of it. And it landed directly face down on the microphone and the entire weight of the stand coming behind it. And I was just aghast. I had no idea what to do. Here I was, I think like my first week at the studio, and I had already broken a super nice microphone. And I continued setting things up, put it back the way it should be, and I said to myself, what am I going to do? What am I going to tell the owner who just in good faith hired me to set up mics at his studio that very early on I knocked over and broke a fragile high-end microphone? So I went through the line checks, debating how to handle it. Should I tell him a story? Should I tell him the truth? And I got to this Coles 4038 and did a line check, and it was totally fine. It was fine. It worked. I guess I got lucky? I don't know. Here I was thinking like the wind from it falling over was going to break the capsule on the way down. And there, it worked. So I kind of avoided a terrible fate that time, but it does show that I made a super dumb mistake. And that's not the only one. There's been plenty of others like this. I actually haven't told this story publicly before. So the owner of that studio, Will Schillinger, in case you're listening, yes, I dropped one of your Coles 4038 microphones from about 15 feet up one time. Sorry about that. I never told you because it worked fine. So now you know, if you're listening to this podcast episode, you can tell Will if you know him and you're listening to this. So that's not the only thing I did. This next one, Will did know about, because on this fancy Neve VR console, I thought I understood this thing pretty well. I had spent my time on the subway going back and forth to the studio, reading the manual to the console, totally nerding out about it. I wanted to know it inside and out, and I felt like I knew it so well. I was helping people patch into it. New engineers would come in from other places, and I would set up everything for them, and I would tell them how everything worked. But apparently I didn't know the center section as well as I thought I did, because apparently there is a button. It's not labeled this way, but the effect is when you push it, it creates a feedback loop and it blows up your studio monitors. Why they put a blow up your studio monitors button on a console, I don't know. It's technically not what it is. I am dumb and I created a feedback loop not knowing what was going on. And right before a session was starting, blew out the main midfield monitors that were sitting on the meter bridge. And yeah, Will knew about that one. Hadn't been there for very long before I destroyed his main set of monitors. Basically blew out the tweeters on a very nice set of Atom speakers. So still, this is a situation, major mistake, but crisis averted. We got some other speakers in there to plug into the hole while we waited for replacement tweeters for our main speakers. And I'm sure those weren't the only mistakes I made in that studio, but both of them made me better at what I do. I don't want to tell you that the best way to learn is to make a lot of mistakes, but it is one way to learn. Ideally, you can learn from other people's mistakes. So hopefully me telling you this will help you avoid certain similar situations in the future. But both of those situations felt really bad. I felt like the world was ending and I had let down the people around me. And ultimately, things turned out to be fine. In both those situations, I went on, worked at the studio probably another couple years before I left for, greener pastures and all that. But they were harrowing experiences that, number one, made me be even more careful than I already was about where I was stepping when it came to microphones, and be even more cognizant of things like, hey, what I'm doing possibly going to send a big spike somehow through these speakers. let me mute them down before I do anything like that. And just made me more conscious and less prone to errors around routing in situations like that. They also made me confront things about ethical dilemmas. I'd like to think that had that microphone actually broken in the first case, I would have told Will. It would have been like George Washington and told him that I had knocked over the microphone tree. And that one made me go through an ethical dilemma. And by the time I had gotten to the line check, I had really accepted my fate and had come to, I think, the right determination of how to deal with that situation. But those aren't my biggest mistakes in the studio. I'll tell you about a couple others that haunt me to this day and still affect the way that I work today. One of them was one of the very first projects I ever produced and mixed for money. I think I made all $350 for doing so. And arguably, they got what they paid for. Now I'm knocking myself a little bit, but at this point, I had been working with audio stuff for about a decade since I'd been working on 4-tracks, as a teenager. So if they were going to pay anyone $350 to produce and mix an album, probably better off that it was me than somebody else. But really the biggest mistake I made on this one was at the very end. And I had gotten my mixes together and I'd gotten them to a place where I really liked the way things were sounding. The band liked them. There were good balances overall in this mix. But I started at the very end comparing it to some of my favorite commercial releases. And I didn't really know how to use references well at that point. I started trying to outdo all of these references. One of the things that I kept coming back to is that my mix just sounds a little dark, a little bit muffled, not quite as bright and clear as some of these great sounding commercial releases. So let me just go in and EQ a few things to brighten it up overall. I did this at the very end, the 11th hour, and then it got sent off to mastering. I said to the main guy in the band who wrote all this stuff and was interacting with the mastering engineer who was going to do it for like $150 an entire album, and probably got what they paid for there as well. But I said to him, there's a chance I went a little bit too far brightening things up. It sounds nice, it sounds tight now, but maybe some of that fullness and girth could go back into it. And in mastering, maybe he could look to do that, to get the thing to be a little bit fuller and beefier sounding, slightly more in the direction we had it, and just kind of split the difference a little bit. So it went to mastering, and it came back sounding like it had been recorded and mixed through a couple of tin cans. He took this too bright mix of mine and made it even brighter. And fair enough to him that, 70-80% of the time that you get mixes in that are competent, they'll usually sound pretty good, but be a little bit dark. And you often need to take out some low mids and add a little bit of presence in the upper mid range or the highs, maybe manage the bass a little bit. But I think he did this without listening to the record because it needed the exact opposite of that. This is one of those 20 or 30% of records that needs to get a little warmer and darker and fuller in mastering. And he did the exact opposite. And the record got released that way. And to this day, it haunts me. It haunts me not just because I did a less good job than I could have. It haunts me not just because I did something dumb by trying to make mastering decisions at the final hour as a mixer right before it went to mastering, having done my own master to it without knowing how mastering works and then sending it to a mastering engineer. That wasn't the worst of the mistake. The biggest mistake was that I didn't or couldn't find a way at that time to have a conversation, to say, hey, I know we just want to be done with this project and move on, but something's not sitting right. And if I could have found that time in my life, in my early 20s, a diplomatic way to have this conversation of, I get what he's trying to do here. Let's do one set of revisions. I can revise things on my end. I can back off on all the processing I did, or maybe he could tweak his settings and just take in a slightly darker direction. But that conversation never even happened. I just went with the idea of, oh, he's the mastering engineer who should know more than me. And I guess if he's doing it that way, it's right or something. And underneath, I was seething because I knew something was wrong. And externally, I didn't say something was wrong because I didn't know how to do it, I think, at that age without being extremely critical and seething. So I kind of was silent when I should have just had a normal, decent human conversation about what we want this thing to actually sound like. And here are the ways we're a little far away from where it should end up. And what can we do? And what can I do differently to get it there? Those conversations, once you learn how to have them, are so easy. And I have them all the time with mastering clients. But one of the reasons they're so easy today is because I had that experience. And I know how bad it feels and how bad things turn out if you don't have that conversation. So this experience of the failure of the first thing I was ever paid money to produce and mix has helped me. It's made me better for the whole rest of my career. Not to say that I never made the same mistake again. I made it again one other time, much, much further on. And that second time, that's when I really said, never again. And in experiences after that one, where things went a little bit the wrong way in mastering, I had the confidence to speak up and say, my opinion is just as valid as the mastering engineers, and let's listen to this compared to other records we love, and let's think about it not just in a sip test, but in how it feels when we're 3 or 4 or 5 songs in. Because that first record that I ever really did for money, it still to this day sounds pretty good when you listen to 1 or 2 songs, but when you get 3 or 4 in, it just kind of is a little fatiguing. And it's not because of over limiting, it's just because of being a little bit too bright. And again, there, the biggest mistake was not having that conversation, not just slowing down for a second and talking through whether it's gone in the right direction or not. And I think that's what's made me one of the most overly communicative mastering engineers these days. Is when I'm working with a mastering client, I want to get on the same page with them from the beginning. Like, what do your favorite records sound like? I want to listen to them, and I want to listen to your record and see how close you are to where you probably meant for this thing to end up. And I want to give you the option to have a free revision where I'm going to ask you to give me reasons to revise this. And even if you need to make revisions on your side, I want to accommodate that into my process. And hopefully all of that is unnecessary, but I'm just so into leaving the door open for that and having that conversation, because I know some people are afraid to speak up, especially when they think there might be an imbalance in knowledge or power or authority or whatever it is. So just making that sure that that door open is such a big part of my mastering process. And I think that's one of the things my clients like about working with me. They know I'm in their corner, and I'm really trying to make sure that it ends up sounding the way that they intended for it to sound, and hopefully even a little bit better than that. So it's another one of those situations where I made a mistake, I think my fault, and literally kept me up at night, but has made me better at what I do today. But the bad things that happen to you on your way to having a career or even just a fruitful hobby or passion in music or audio aren't just going to be the mistakes you make. Sometimes things will happen where it wasn't really a mistake because you couldn't have done anything better in that situation. So here's one example. When I was in my mid-20s, there was an assistant spot that opened up at, I think, was probably the coolest studio in Brooklyn, which at that point was the coolest place on planet Earth. I don't know if it is anymore, but back then it was, all right? For at least that period in time, there I was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, when Brooklyn was cool. And I had the chance to be the main assistant at what I thought was the coolest studio. Studio G, Brooklyn, run by a guy, friend of mine named Joel Hamilton, fantastic guy. He's been on the podcast before. You should check out the episode with him. I've done interviews with him. And he's just one of the most likable, fun dudes to be around. He has a great ear, great taste, does great work, and did back then too. And his assistant was going on, I think, to start his own studio, and he was looking for someone to put into that slot. And it basically came down to me to come down and be there as a paid assistant in a hip spot making hip records. And it was basically my dream job. And just before I was supposed to go down for my first day, I think it might have even been the night before, I broke up with my fiance and my girlfriend of 8 years and was an absolutely devastated wreck of a shell of a man. And I had a lot of trouble focusing in the session, bringing my best to the session, being the kind of person rising to the standards that I expect of myself. While I still was there assisting for those 3 days of that first session, and I did the best I could under the circumstances, but I was just so scattered, so distracted, so not myself, and just so torn up inside. You know that feeling when your heart goes... And I just said, I can't do this right now. I just can't take on this big, awesome, life-changing opportunity. And was that a mistake? I don't know if it was a mistake because I just couldn't at that point. I wasn't emotionally strong enough. I wasn't mature enough at that point. And I just couldn't take on the new responsibility and deliver to the level which I thought I should be delivering. And I had to bow out of it. And someone else became his assistant. And that was another one of those things where I was second guessing myself, and it was a blow on top of a blow, and it just kind of sent me reeling a little bit. And ultimately, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. It didn't feel fine at the moment, but here I am. I'm almost 40. I've got a great career doing stuff that I like doing, working with sound and talking to you guys about audio and sound. And I've got a great house and a nice studio at home here. I've got a great wife. I've got a family. It's awesome. And I actually much prefer the career that I'm in now to the career that the guy who did end up becoming his assistant has. Not that his career is bad. I just much prefer what I'm doing to what he's doing. So it all worked out. And sometimes the things that seem like the worst thing that ever happened to you, like the person you were going to marry, who you were with for 8 years, you and them break up, feels like the worst thing that ever happened to you at the time, turns out to be the best thing that ever happens to you because you get into a relationship with someone you're way more compatible with and your life is so much easier. And you're like, oh, wow, relationships can actually be way better than that one was, right? And you wind up finding yourself like, hey, I lost what I thought was going to be my dream job. And you end up in a career path that's even better for you and everything's better. And there are so many other stories like that where I either made a mistake or missed a boat or turned down an opportunity that was like the best thing ever. And it turned out fine. Sometimes it's just a luck of the draw that a great opportunity comes around and you're not ready for it. But that doesn't stop you from going on to have a fruitful life. And you may be saying something slightly different if you're in a different position. Say you don't have a career in audio and you say, well, that's all well and good for you, Justin. You still ended up with a career in audio, but I missed out on my biggest, best opportunity. It didn't work out and I don't have a career in audio. But maybe that's the best thing that ever happened to you. Because for most people, you probably shouldn't have a career in audio or music. It's not the best way or easiest way to make a living. And you might have found that you made for yourself a life with fewer compromises that you enjoy more by not sticking with audio or music as a career and having it be a passion or a hobby instead, because that's the right thing and the potentially best thing that ever happened to you for a lot of people. So each one of these major mistakes, I diminish and laugh about them now, and I laugh at myself about them now, but each of these situations, I was absolutely devastated and lost sleep over them for some matter of time. And I'd wake up sometimes thinking about them months, and in some cases even years later. But all that went away. And the mistakes taught me to be better. And the luck of the draw things that aren't necessarily mistakes, it's just like, that's what happened. They often have a way of making you focus and find a path that's even more right for you than that path might have been. Ultimately, the worst things that ever happened to you in your life, things much worse than what we're talking about right now, can often be the best things that ever happened to you. I mean, it sounds cliche to say that, there's positives in every negative situation, there's opportunities in every crisis, but it is profoundly true. I mean, there's so many situations. There was a kind of therapist, let's say, whose work I was following a little bit, who made this comment about even terrible things, like the death of a spouse. How can you imagine anything positive in the death of a spouse? And it's like, well, they died before you, so they don't have to watch you die. You would want to see someone who you love that much go through the pain of losing you. And the fact that they passed away means that they don't have to watch or experience that. And you can take that burden away from them. That was an interesting reframing. And that's something that's much more serious than anything that we've been talking about so far. So whatever little things have happened to you, or even big things that have happened to you that were either mistakes, missed opportunities, bad luck in audio, all of those can be part of the path to making you stronger, better at what you do, and find an even better fit for your unique set of talents, skills, aptitudes. Let me know in the comments down below. If you prefer to email me, you can email me at podcast@sonicscoop.com. What were some of your biggest mistakes that you've made in the studio? What were some things that kept you up nights? What were some of your biggest missed opportunities? What was some of the worst luck that you've had? Hopefully, you can also tell me how you overcame it, or how it made you stronger or better at what you do. And if you can't tell me that yet, take some time and figure it out. Well, I hope you enjoyed joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. I want to give a super quick shout out to our sponsors. Remember, the biggest and most important sponsor is you. If for some reason you've gotten this far into the podcast, you clearly don't mind hearing the sound of me talking. So if you want to learn how to mix better and how to master better, who better to do it with? You got to check out the full-length course, Mixing Breakthroughs, which you can get over at mixingbreakthroughs.com. It will help you mix more creatively with more confidence and better results than ever before. You're going to find your mix quality improve while your time to complete each mix goes down. Check it out with a 30-day money-back guarantee over at mixingbreakthroughs.com. Or if you want to learn everything I know about mastering, you can check that out over at masteringdemystified.com. And through both of these, you can learn through my mistakes instead of making your own. Quick shout out as well to Sound Toys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.